Hello everybody, welcome back to the 5 Red Lights. My name's Aaron. This is of course the 5 Red Lights, and let's discuss what happened in the pulsating Imola Grand Prix.
1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and it's go!
Wowee, what an absolutely brilliant race. Sensational. It was carnage at the start and it was brilliant all the way to the end. I've taken a little while to catch my breath and collect my thoughts, and now I'm ready to share them with the F1 world. But before I do that, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel, leave a like on the video if you enjoy it, and check out some of my other content. I've unboxed a Imola edition of the Drive Crate box, which actually went live today and has already smashed 17 views, which might not seem a great deal, but that is the quickest any video of mine has got to double figures. So thanks to anyone who has watched that, everyone who's watched that. And yeah, let's crack on with the review of the Imola Grand Prix. So Max Verstappen was victorious, making amends for the Bahrain Grand Prix 3 weeks ago. And it was kind of roles reversed, wasn't it? Hamilton on pole today and Verstappen coming out victorious. But it couldn't have been very straightforward for either of them, really, because obviously the wet conditions at the start made it very, very difficult. And I was actually surprised to see Verstappen getting away. He won the start. And he got away so well. It was a brilliant start. His teammate Perez, he got a decent start, but Verstappen still absolutely mugged his teammate on the run down to turn 1, and it gave him that fantastic run on Hamilton. It was very reminiscent, actually, of Ralf Schumacher's start at the 2001 San Marino Grand Prix, 20 years ago, actually, this year, for BMW Williams, and he ended up going on to win his first race on that day. Verstappen was firm but fair with Hamilton at the first braking zone. And I think for me, this was... I think they played that montage on Sky F1 where they asked Hamilton if he treats... and there was that clip where he's asked if he treats Verstappen differently. And he said yes, of course he does. But I think that's just come down to not racing each other. And I think this was another... Well, this was the first real show of weakness on that perspective from Hamilton. A little bit of a lack of knowledge of racing against Verstappen wheel to wheel like that. Obviously they've had a few races here and there, but it's always been a massive advantage in one or the other's favour. But this was the first time they've really gone wheel to wheel at the start of a Grand Prix. And I think maybe he was thinking Hamilton he could squeeze Verstappen and then grab the apex for turn 3, which was the second part of the Tamburello chicane. Wasn't to be. And he had to fall back into second place, albeit after bumping over those big yellow curbs, which I think actually made that really, really good, because there was a punishment for getting it wrong, but it was also it's like a get out of jail free, but you know you're gonna suffer for it. So they had them at the... Where else did they have them? Did they have them at Villeneuve chicane? They had them somewhere else on the track, but they were really good, because if you run wide, there's a penalty for it, but if you run extra wide, then you're in the gravel and your race could be over. So there's always that. And I thought that was really good of the circuit designers or officials. So back to the race. Hamilton and Verstappen pulled away after the safety car restart in a class of their own. The gap was at one point up to 6 seconds for Verstappen, but it kind of fluctuated between 3 and 6. Because of traffic and the tyres. So Verstappen's tyres might have been overheating and then he had to cool them down, and then it would just coincide with when Hamilton was closing the gap a little bit. So it was a little bit cat and mouse, and as the track dried, Hamilton was closing through that phase, and there was obviously lapping cars and the track was drying, and we know how strong Hamilton is in that phase of a race. And Mercedes seemed to have more pace than the Red Bull. He closed to about 1.5 seconds, and that's when Verstappen and Red Bull went for the pit stop. It was a fascinating duel. A bit of a shame that we didn't actually get to see that play out towards the end of the race, because that would have been quite something if they'd stuck together going at it on the dry tyres. especially after the safety car after the red flag restart. Of course, that wasn't to be. After the stops, Hamilton was rapid. I think, obviously, Max was being held up a lot in the traffic. They were all fighting each other, and some people are on dry, some people are on the wets still. And I don't know whether this was convenient or a hindrance for Hamilton, because Valtteri Bottas was actually at the head of that train. And that's where Hamilton ended up making that very costly mistake. Surprising mistake. And Hamilton is the sort of driver who doesn't tend to make those sort of mistakes. But of course, he's human and these mistakes happen. Just got a little bit too excited, I think, knowing that he was gaining on his chief championship rival. Went in on the inside of Tosa, slid off because it was still very damp there. And he didn't hit the barrier initially. I think he tried to be smart and sort of flick the car around with a bit of wheel spin, but it just didn't get any purchase in the gravel and it just went straight into the barrier. Could have been a lot worse. He could have damaged the front right wheel and been out of the race completely, or he could have got beached. So, thanking his lucky stars that he managed to get himself out of there. He showed some very cool traits there in terms of keeping calm and reversing his way out of the situation. But it took him a very long time, which would probably be very frustrating to him. He was bailed out, of course, by the red flag, which came a couple of laps later. Verstappen survived his own moment himself at the safety car restart from the red flag. And obviously Hamilton had escaped from his, so Verstappen survived to take the victory, and Hamilton got himself up to P2. Once he got into that groove on the medium tyres, there was no stopping him. DRS was very powerful, which is fine because the rest of the track is so difficult to overtake on, and it's difficult to follow through the two Ravazza corners. So you got to stay close. You got to have your car underneath you, and then you get that reward for getting the DRS. So in that respect, I think it worked well. It provided some action, otherwise we'd have been a bit stuck. But once they got back to first and second, it was a bit of a shootout for the fastest lap. Hamilton pipped Verstappen with a 1:16.702, which he did on lap 60, obviously with the help of DRS. And it gives him that crucial single point lead, leaving Italy heading to Portimao. And that race could be just as fun as this one was today. Obviously, Max scores the big blow in terms of the victory, but he must be very, very wary of how Hamilton generally responds to a mistake or a poor weekend. Mercedes have another week or so to hone their package to close in on Red Bull. Of course, the Milton Keynes team will be pushing as hard as they can, but Hamilton and Mercedes are getting on top of that car, and it's going to be an absolutely enthralling battle because, okay, we didn't have the final showdown in the second half of the race today, but it was there. You could see the cat and mouse, the to and fro in the early stages as one closed and one set a fastest lap and then the other would respond. Fantastic racing. But it's fantastic for the championship that they're so closely matched and they're willing to take each other on. So Max and Lewis filled the top two positions as most of us probably predicted, including myself. Although I didn't get it right on the Saturday, I thought Verstappen would take the pole. But it was Lewis who pulled out the magic lap. In third place was Lando Norris. A little old Lando. He has got himself on the podium. What a brilliant effort. What a super weekend from Lando. He was outstanding and fully deserved his driver of the day vote. He did lose ground early on, starting from 7th, but he made some superb early passes. I think he passed 2 in one go at one point. I can't remember who it was. One of them was definitely Sainz and possibly Stroll, because I think they were all bottled up behind Pierre Gasly. But he used the extra straight line speed of the McLaren with the Mercedes engine in it now, and he was able to catch up with his teammate Daniel Ricciardo. Then he got on the phone and was saying that he had more pace, and he did. He just cruised up to the back of his teammate. McLaren successfully used the team orders to give Norris the advantage, and fair play to Ricciardo for obeying. He's a smart cookie, so he would have realised that that was the right move to make for the team. There was no point holding up Norris and hurting the whole team's race. Lando obviously then utilised the free air to close in on Sergio Perez, which then enabled him to capitalise on the Mexican's penalty for overtaking under the safety car. And it was a bold play as well, after the red flag restart, for McLaren to go onto the soft tyres with both cars. It didn't quite work out for Daniel, but it allowed Lando to actually snatch P2 from Charles on the restart. Now, it's actually come to light after the race that Charles was having radio issues where it was just one-way traffic. So he could speak to them, but he couldn't hear the Ferrari team on the pit wall. So he was a little bit slow on picking up that it was a rolling restart, not a standing restart, which is why he was so far behind Verstappen and why Leclerc was able to lose the place to Lando quite so easily. Obviously, Lando was never likely to keep a charging Hamilton behind, but he did a brilliant job retaining his place over Leclerc and coming in third, his best finish on the road, a fine reward for his efforts. He probably had to work a little bit harder than he wanted to, given his pace in practice 3 and in qualifying. But he did have those qualifying dramas with track limits, so a sensational effort from Lando Norris and a fully deserved podium. Let's talk about Valtteri Bottas. Now, I said before the weekend that he needed to turn up at Imola, and he had previous for being strong at Imola. He took pole position last year in 2020, so his practice form was actually really good, and in qualifying he was there or thereabouts. He was a little bit behind Hamilton in Q2, but then in the first runs in Q3 he was well off the pace, and you think, okay, maybe he's just made a mistake. But then in the first sector of his second run, he's nearly 4 tenths down. By the time he gets to the end of the middle sector, it's nearly half a second down. And then he ends up 8th on the grid. It's Groundhog Day again, isn't it? What is he doing? How is he ending up in these situations? Because it just unravelled from there. And the fact is that his Q1 time on the soft tyres was quicker than either of his Q3 times on soft tyres. So that's an issue. But then, again, he dropped back at the start. Either he simply is way too cautious on the opening corners or has a fundamental problem when he's getting the car off the line. Which means he's stuck in the pack. And today he struggled to bring the wet tyres into their temperature range, which he struggled to do in Turkey because he was constantly spinning around. Okay, there was steering wheel issue after the contact with Ocon on lap 1, but then that was a dumb move going up the inside there. Today he just couldn't make any headway. You know, they're all being bottled up by Gasly, and there's no DRS. He wasn't stuck in a DRS train. And look at Hamilton. At that stage of the race, he had front wing damage, and he was still chasing Verstappen for the lead, setting very fast sector times. Okay, he had clear air, but he had the damage, and that could have been very, very hindering to his ambitions. So, of course, this put Valtteri in a position where he would have to battle other cars. Whoops. And then he was, of course, involved in that big crash with George Russell. Now, for me, it's just a racing incident. I don't think the stewards are looking at anything on it. I don't think either driver is wholly to blame, more than the other. I think George was spooked by Bottas's little wiggle to the right. I haven't seen it, as in I can't recognise the wiggle. Like, George has said he moves to the right. It doesn't look that sharp to me. It might be a slightly more graceful one, but bear in mind, my eyes are not trained to see these things in the way that Formula 1 drivers are. So you'll just have to forgive me for that. Valtteri took a middle line into Tamburello to defend, and George got caught out on the wet patch or the grass on the outside. And remember, it's a narrow circuit. It's not one of these big, wide open Tilke circuits like Sepang or at some parts in China. So a little move like that could have huge consequences, and it did. And that's racing on a narrow old style race circuit. My argument against Bottas here is that he should not be racing George Russell at all in that situation. Not saying that he should just be letting George take the place. He shouldn't even be in that position. He should be up at the front challenging with Hamilton and Verstappen. And it's all built up from the poor start where he lost places and was unable to pick off the cars ahead of him. And like I said, he wasn't stuck in a DRS train. Who knows? It's one of those Bottas phantoms where it's just one of those days where he just doesn't have it. And for some reason, from the naked eye and without having any of the data available, it's almost unexplainable, because on another day he will be at the front and almost impossible to beat. I mean, I said before, he needs to turn up because he doesn't want to be the wingman, but is Bottas already out of contention for the World Championship? He's many points behind now. He's not even in the top 3. Norris is 3rd in the World Championship. So Valtteri has got to pull out all the stops at the next couple of races. And he's got to win. If not the next race, he's got to have taken a win by the time we leave Monaco, which I think is round 6. So pressure's on already for Valtteri. On the flip side, what does this do for George Russell's chances of getting into a Mercedes seat for next season? Does it hamper them? Not for me. You know, he was putting the Williams into a points-paying position where it's not really expected to be honest. And he out-qualified two world champions in Q2, scoring 12th place on the grid. And he was driving brilliantly. It was just one of those unfortunate racing incidents. And we're just very glad to see both drivers walking away from that unscathed. Let's have a look at the fortunes of the home teams then, the Italian teams. Let's start with Ferrari. They had the strongest afternoon, scoring 4th and 5th with Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, which is an excellent result for the Scuderia. Their quest is to get back to the front of the field, and to do that they've first got to top the midfield. So this is a really strong result for them. They were sandwiched by the McLarens, who are going to be their main rivals for 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. But if you think back to last year, Charles would have been up there, maybe not quite that high, but around there anyway, and Seb would have been 10th, 12th, way down the order. But there's Carlos backing his teammate up. The car is better this year, of course, and the power unit is improved. But that doesn't mean that Seb was doing a great job. There was obviously a lot going on there. Carlos is fresh into the seat, stronger package, and he's delivering. He even had the opportunity to wander off and explore some of the local villagery a couple of times. 22 points on the road is great, and they made really good use of the fact that AlphaTauri created a rolling roadblock in Pierre Gasly, who was stuck on the wet tyres. And it turned into a pretty bad weekend for AlphaTauri. They qualified 5th and last when Tsunoda crashed in Q1, and Gasly managed to get into P5, although it would have been P6 had Lando Norris's lap time stuck, of course, if he'd kept it within track limits. But I think AlphaTauri got it very wrong on their strategy, and it's obviously easy for me to say given what we've seen, but just the thought process as well. You've got one car starting in the top 5 and you've got one car starting at the back. Put the guy on the back on the wets, because if you have to bring them in and change the tyres, he loses nothing. If it works, you're on to a winner, because almost everyone else is going to have to come in perhaps maybe those around you will be forced into changing their thoughts on the tyres, but you'll move up places. But with Gasly, put him on the inters. Do the same as those around you. Don't try and overthink it. Keep it very simple. Because if they go on inters, and it was clear it was an intermediates track, if they all go on inters, then you're going to go with them. But in the end, Gasly again falls down the order. This time, not really his fault, although he could have demanded that they come in and change the tyres earlier. They were even handed a golden opportunity, a second chance, when the safety car came out. And Esteban Ocon took it, and soon enough he was right on Gasly's tail. Gasly did soldier on. He had zero pace, and was losing about 8 seconds a lap at one stage. But he did recover to 8th. Yuki ended up 13th, so a few points for AlphaTauri, but another case of what could have been. They could have had a big score in Bahrain, but Gasly knocked off his front wing, and today they fluffed it on the strategy. And of course, the third and final Italian team is Alfa Romeo. They picked up a couple of points with Kimi Raikkonen, although he does need to pay a visit to the stewards post-race for a rolling restart infringement. Without having seen anything about that in terms of the details, I'm assuming he maybe didn't keep the 10 car lengths. That's my guess. We'll have to wait and see on that. Giovinazzi, home race for him. He had a rear brake issue, seemed to be overheating. He came in to fix that, and he ended up coming to the flag in 14th place. So Alpha, with the 2 points, will probably be fairly satisfied with that. AlphaTauri will be disappointed with their weekend, having only got 4 points to show for that, for their efforts. But Ferrari will be very happy. 4th and 5th on the road, and 22 points in the Constructors' Championship. Not quite sure where that puts them, actually. I haven't looked. But a strong showing for the Scuderia. And finally, let's highlight a few star performances. Now, we've already covered Lando Norris, and I think he is the big star performer of the day. He got driver of the day. He was my vote. So a very strong performance for Lando. Very well deserved. Charles Leclerc stood out as well for me, as did Carlos Sainz. Of course, Max and Lewis were right up there too. But I also want to highlight the performance of Lance Stroll. That Aston Martin has lost a fair chunk of performance. Not enough to go crying to the FIA about, though. I mean, like Christian Horner said, they're being a bit naive. I think they're a little bit brave if they think they're going to get the regulations changed mid-season. I mean, get on with it. It's Otmar Zafnauer's interview with Ted Kravitz. It sounded to me a lot like Lawrence Stroll had told him exactly what to say. That's the sort of thing I would expect a very successful businessman to come out with, who's used to getting his own way. Not the sort of thing I'd expect from Otmar. But back to Lance, he drove really well in the early stages, and we know how good he is in the wet after he took that pole position in Istanbul at the back end of last season. Despite having his rear brakes on fire pre-race, he still managed to get that car to the finish. He had a gear sync problem later in the race, which eventually caused his teammate to retire, but Lance managed to get to the flag in 7th place, which was a fantastic achievement considering the issues that the Aston Martin team are going through. They're probably not going to get their way with the FIA, so they may just have to write off this year, do the best they can, and look ahead to 2022. But well done, Sir Lancelot. Great job from you. I think you are a improving driver and no longer that pay driver that people considered you before. Top job, Lance. Well done. Okay, well, that is all for this episode of the 5 Red Lights. Before I leave you, I would like to remind you that I have set up a Driver of the Month vote. So I will leave a link in the top line of the description below for you to go and leave your votes for Driver of the Month. Of course, it covers the Bahrain and Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. And that closes in 5 days' time. So that is Friday. That vote closes Friday at 10 o'clock. So you've got a week or so to consider your thoughts. And cast your votes. I think you can cast more than one, so you can go back and vote as many times as you like. If you want to find another link to that, I'll be putting it out on Twitter, which my Twitter is 5_red_lights. So give me a follow on there as well. I'm actually at 99 followers, so be quick. You could be my 100th follower on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram at 5redlights, and I have a blog for which I will also leave the link in the description down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the Emilia-Romagna. Well, hang on, to give it its full name, the Pirelli Gran Premio del Made in Italy del Emilia-Romagna. And yes, that was first time for anyone who asks. Hope you enjoyed the race. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you're new around here. Thanks for watching. My name's Aaron. This has been the 5 Red Lights. And when the 5 red lights go out in Portimao, I will see you next time. Bye for now.